What tiny ridiculous spark have you seen ignite an argument so unnecessarily dramatic that you thought, surely nothing could top this? Because tonight you're about to wander through Olympus and watch the gods outdo every petty quarrel mortals have ever had. Before we start, likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them thinking, wait, people in the States listen to history stories to sleep. Okay, tonight we are talking about the gods' very petty arguments. But before we go anywhere, get cozy. Pillows good. Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. You take a slow step forward into the softened glow of Olympus, where marble doesn't feel as cold as it should, and the air tastes faintly of honey and warm sunlight. The corridors curve gently, like they were carved by a breeze rather than tools, and every footstep lands in a muffled hush that makes you instinctively breathe more quietly. Olympus is always calm in that deceptive way. A house gets right before someone starts complaining in the next room. Still, but bracing for impact. A lazy draft drifts past you, warm as someone exhaling from a nap. It carries a familiar floral scent, something like rose, something like ocean spray, and something else you can't quite name. The kind of layered fragrance only a goddess who pretends she woke up like this would trail behind her. The lights along the hall, soft floating orbs that glow like miniature moons, bounce their reflections across the marble floor, bathing everything in sleepy gold. You hear an almost laugh just ahead, not a real one, more like the polite, restrained huff a person makes when they're trying very hard not to disagree publicly. You follow the sound and find yourself at the threshold of a chamber framed by tall columns swirling upward like frozen smoke. Inside, Hera stands at the center of the room with her hands clasped so tightly you can practically hear the strain. Her crown gleams in a way that feels less like jewelry and more like a warning sign. She breathes in slowly, smoothing the front of her robe with the kind of calm that announces she is extremely not calm. Hermes lounges against a pillar nearby. His sandals flutter in little impatient beats, like restless birds gossiping at his feet. When he spots you, he brightens with visible relief. You get the sense he feels safer having a witness, someone sane or at least mortal enough not to escalate things further. You've arrived at an interesting moment, he murmurs without moving from his lean. Hera clears her throat in that pointed way someone does when they want everyone to know they could yell if they wanted to. All I am saying, she begins, each word smooth as polished stone, is that someone should have considered the consequences before inviting certain guests. Hermes winces. Ah, right. That, you step farther into the room, letting the soft warmth settle against your skin. The walls are lined with tapestries, heroic battles, triumphant gods, dramatic scenes, but one catches your eye immediately, a single golden apple, embroidered so finely it almost glows. 3 goddesses reach toward it with unmistakably competitive expressions. You look at Hera. She pretends she has never seen the tapestry in her life. Hermes glides to your side, lowering his voice like he's sharing a secret the torches shouldn't overhear. The apple, he says. Everything always comes back to the apple. You nod. Apples are usually harmless, except when they're enchanted for mischief and tossed into divine dinner parties by someone who thrives on chaos. Hera sighs sharply. One accidentally dramatic guest list, she mutters. 1. Hermes shrugs helplessly. It's not like Eris doesn't warn people about herself. Her whole title is Goddess of Discord. There isn't much ambiguity. You take in the room again. The humming torches, the soft shifting light, the faint pulse of tension under the calm surface. Olympus wears serenity like a silk robe, but underneath, the seams pull. Hermes nudges you gently with his elbow. You want the full story, don't you? You breathe in the honey-warm air, feeling it coat your thoughts in softness. Yes, you do. Hermes grins. Then follow me. It's a good one. And with a flick of his sandals and a half-whispered sigh from Hera, the journey begins again, guided by gods, woven with pettiness, anchored by one shimmering piece of fruit. Hermes leads you out of the chamber, the marble floor humming faintly beneath your feet, like it's remembering old arguments. The hallway widens into an airy terrace, where the sunlight pools in gentle folds, warm and syrup-thick, as if someone poured liquid gold across the stones. The breeze greets you immediately, playful and soft, brushing your cheek with the coolness of drifting cloud edges. Hermes walks beside you at an unhurried pace, even though his sandals twitch with the urge to move faster. He hooks his staff loosely behind his shoulders, glancing sideways at you with a half smirk. You'd think, he says, that immortals who have lived for thousands of years would understand invitation etiquette. You laugh under your breath. He lifts a hand. I'm serious. You don't invite the goddess of discord to anything involving wine, food, or vulnerable social dynamics. Honestly, you probably shouldn't invite her anywhere at all. Your footsteps blend with the rustle of olive branches overhead. The terrace stretches into a path lined with trees, whose leaves shimmer like feathers dipped in moonlight. Somewhere above, Apollo plucks a lazy string on his lyre, adding a drifting note to the warm air. Hermes continues, the banquet was beautiful, absolutely perfect, the kind of event you'd paint on a vase. He sighs dramatically, and then fruit happened. You tilt your head. Fruit. Oh yes. He nods. A single golden apple rolls right into the middle of the banquet, like it's making a grand entrance, and on it, carved with all the subtlety of a divine prankster, were the words for the fairest. You can imagine the room going still, the sound of wine cups pausing mid-air, the exact moment where every goddess simultaneously decides she is, in fact, the fairest. Hermes cringes at the memory. Hera wanted it because she's queen. Athena wanted it because she thinks logic is beauty, which honestly, fair enough. And Aphrodite. Well, you know Aphrodite. You do. The scent drifting earlier in the hallway was unmistakable. They debated politely at first, he says, raising his brows to emphasize the rarity. Sophisticated arguments, graceful tones, all very dignified. He pauses. That lasted about 1 minute. The breeze brushes past your shoulders, carrying warmth and jasmine-like sweetness. You feel yourself settling deeper into the gentle rhythm of Olympus, a place where even childish arguments glow with mythic softness. But Zeus, Hermes says, wanted absolutely nothing to do with choosing. He claimed it was because he valued all of them equally, which translates roughly to please, do not involve me. So they needed someone else, someone neutral. You lean against a marble railing, the stone pleasantly cool beneath your palms. Below, clouds drift like enormous pillows, their edges glowing in the afternoon light. Hermes taps the railing. A mortal judge, a shepherd, a young man with no idea what was waiting for him. He sighs sympathetically. Poor Paris, truly. The olive leaves shimmer. A harp plucks again somewhere distant. The entire mountain seems to breathe in slow, steady waves. Hermes straightens and gestures down the path. Come on, let's talk about how one mortal became the center of divine drama. You follow, warmed by sunlight, wrapped in drifting clouds, and carried gently toward a destiny woven by a single, shimmering apple. Hermes guides you down a winding path, lined with pale stone tiles that feel warm under your feet, as if they've been resting in the sun for centuries. The air here shifts into something softer, quieter, as though Olympus itself recognizes that the next part of this story requires a gentler backdrop. The breeze hums low, as it curls between the columns, carrying with it the scent of thyme and freshly crushed herbs from somewhere you can't see. It settles into your lungs with a calming weight. Paris, Hermes begins, rolling the name slowly, as if easing back into a memory. A simple boy, well, simple by divine standards. A shepherd, handsome enough that Aphrodite later insisted he must have been destined for this role, which is definitely something she made up after the fact. He lifts his eyebrows. Gods love rewriting history to make themselves look wise. You smile, sensing he's been holding on to that line for a while. The two of you walk along the terrace's edge, where the marble gives way to a balcony carved with swirling, wave-like patterns. Below, the clouds drift lazily in thick, slow billows, carrying faint flashes of light from Zeus's distant annoyance, though you suspect it's just thunder rumbling because he lost a bet with Poseidon again. Hermes leans against the railing, gesturing down toward the world. Paris lived on Mount Ida, far from cities, far from trouble. He liked sheep. He liked quiet. He liked not being caught between furious goddesses who could smite him by blinking. He pauses, and yet, you wait. Hermes freezes, water dripping from his fingers. Oh, absolutely. Of course they did. Grudges are practically the god's favourite hobby. He shakes the water away as he laughs under his breath. Hera still brings it up sometimes. Athena too. Aphrodite insists she doesn't, but she definitely does. You watch a thin stream of water curve around Hermes's fingertip and rejoin the fountain. The whole scene feels warm, calming, wrapped in the softened edges of myth. The story flows around you like a slow-moving current. Paris didn't stand a chance, Hermes murmurs. He was earnest, kind, very easily overwhelmed, which is exactly why each goddess tried to encourage him. You walk with him again, both of you, moving at a pace that feels like drifting. Hera offered power. Athena offered wisdom and glory, and Aphrodite. He pauses, the breeze brushing past him, as if even Olympus is waiting. She offered love. The clouds shift below, glowing softly. And that, Hermes says, with a sigh, was the beginning of everything. The corridor beyond the courtyard narrows and bends, the marble warming under your feet, as though you're descending into a gentler, earthier part of Olympus. The walls are etched with faint, shimmering patterns, waves, ships, distant coastlines, glimpses of the mortal world laid out in soft relief. Hermes slows his pace, letting his sandals brush lightly along the floor, their tiny wings fluttering in a steady, soothing rhythm. Paris's journey to Sparta, he begins, was long, quiet, and filled with that particular kind of hope that makes a person walk farther than they've ever walked before. He swings his staff lightly, the sound tapping against your mind like a lullaby. He followed goat paths, traded stories with travellers, slept beneath starry skies, and all the while, Aphrodite nudged tiny blessings his way. Good weather, gentle dreams, friendly strangers. The air around you warms as you step into another terrace, this one open to the sky. Light spills across it, like melted honey, pooling over benches, pillars, and flowering vines. A fountain sits at the center, water curling lazily from one bowl into another, the sound soothing as a deep breath. Hermes pauses by the fountain, trailing his fingers through the stream before flicking droplets into the sunlight, where they catch and flare like tiny stars. Sparta, he says, was proud, disciplined, orderly, but it was also a place of hospitality, and when Paris arrived, dusty and travel-worn, he was welcomed without question. King Menelaus himself offered shelter. Mortals used to be very generous before they discovered politics. You follow Paris was given a room hood. Hermes continues. Simple but comfortable. Soft beds. Woven blankets. A small window looking out toward the hills. And every night, he dreamed of the same face. Gentle, radiant, framed in sunlight. He glances at you. The dreams were Aphrodite's doing, of course. She wanted him ready. You step into a shaded walkway draped in vines. The air cools noticeably, and the shadows sway like soft curtains. Hermes walks ahead, the wind catching in his cloak, making it flutter like a sleepy bird's wings. Now, he says, Helen of Sparta had a presence that softened even the sternest warrior's posture. Mortals spoke of her beauty with awe. Yes, but also of her kindness. She moved through the palace like a soft breeze, light, warm, calming. He pauses beside a stone relief, depicting a woman spinning cloth, her hair braided elegantly. The carving glows faintly, as if warmed by memory. When Paris saw her, Hermes says softly, time didn't stop, but it certainly stumbled. He felt as though he'd walked straight into the vision Aphrodite showed him, only fuller, realer, touched with breath and heartbeat. The path opens onto a small balcony, overlooking a garden of figs and cypress trees. Their dark leaves sway gently, brushing the air with earthy sweetness. You lean against the railing, feeling the stone smooth beneath your fingertips. Helen noticed Paris too, Hermes says, not with divine destiny, but with curiosity. He was different, not a soldier, not a courtier, not trying to impress. He carried a quietness she found refreshing. Hermes shrugs. Mortals forget this. But Helen was not a prize. She was a woman with her own thoughts, her own desires, and loneliness sits even in palaces. A bird glides overhead, its wings slicing the air in a soft, serene arc. They spoke. Hermes continues. Gently at first. You imagine it. Two young strangers finding warmth in each other's quiet words. And as they spoke, Hermes says, Aphrodite let her influence drift around them like invisible perfume. Not to force love, no, just to soften the hesitations mortals carry. To open the door. You step closer to Hermes as he looks out over the garden. One night, he says, voice lowering, Menelaus left Sparta for a funeral, and Paris and Helen were left alone in a palace filled with moonlight, dreams, and a goddess's very concentrated encouragement. The vines rustle softly around you, the night air of the memory drifting through Olympus like a warm echo. And it was then, Hermes says, that destiny turned its final corner. He steps away from the balcony, guiding you toward another archway. You follow Hermes beneath the golden archway, where the air cools slightly and takes on a soft, dusky glow, as though Olympus itself is dimming the lights for this next part of the tale. The corridor twists gently, wrapped in gentle shadows that sway like silk curtains in a breeze that barely seems to exist. Your footsteps merge with a distant calming hum, perhaps the echo of some faraway hymn drifting through the mountain. After the judgment, Hermes says, walking ahead with an easy bounce, Paris returned to his flock. He tried to pretend nothing extraordinary had happened. Mortals are very good at pretending things are normal, right up until they aren't. He glances back at you, smiling knowingly, but divine gifts never stay subtle for long. You drift beside him as the marble pathway opens into a quiet courtyard, bathed in amber light. Olive trees arch overhead, their silver-green leaves glowing beneath the warm sky. Small spirits of the grove float lazily between branches, their bodies luminous like drifting fireflies. They bow their heads at Hermes, then peer at you with sleepy curiosity. Paris's life should have been simple, Hermes continues. He should have kept tending sheep, played his reed pipe, fallen in love with someone local, and grown into a quiet old man with a gentle dog and a warm hillside view. He pauses with a soft sigh. But Aphrodite had other plans. He sits on a low stone bench, patting the space beside him. You sit, feeling the stone's warmth seep into your palms. The courtyard is peaceful, so peaceful you could fall asleep right here. But Hermes's voice keeps you tethered gently to the story. One evening, he says, Paris sat beside a small spring, watching the water ripple in pale moonlight, and then Hermes makes a soft whooshing sound and twirls his fingers. A presence descended, warm, glowing, impossible not to notice. You imagine it, easily moonlight brightening. A soft shimmer, cascading through the trees. The rustle of divine arrival. Aphrodite appeared, Hermes says, leaning back on his hands, not in full divine splendor. That would have terrified him. She arrived gently. Warm light, delicate fragrance, soft voice. She congratulated him for choosing love, and then she offered him a glimpse of the life she promised. Petals drift from the olive branches, falling like slow snowflakes. They collect near your feet, in little pools of silver white. She showed him Helen, Hermes says, eyes half-lidded, as though watching old memories unfold. Not in person. Gods aren't that reckless. Just an image, a warm, golden vision of her. Paris saw her face, the soft curve of her smile, the light in her eyes. Hermes tilts his head. Some say it wasn't her beauty that captivated him, but the feeling Aphrodite wrapped around the vision, a feeling of warmth, of belonging, of being seen. You exhale slowly. Even imagining that moment feels like sinking into warm water. After that, Hermes continues. Paris couldn't return to his old life. His sheep were still there. His hillside was still peaceful, but his heart had been nudged out of place, pointed toward a destiny he never asked for. He rises and gently gestures for you to follow deeper into the courtyard. The path narrows, lined with small glowing stones that pulse like tiny heartbeats underfoot. So Paris decided, Hermes says, to travel to Sparta. He wanted to see if the vision was real. Mortals do that. They chase the faintest shimmer of a promise, even when they don't understand the cost. Ahead, the path leads to a small marble bridge, spanning a reflective pool that looks like captured moonlight. You step onto it, feeling the cool marble beneath your feet. His father, King Priam, had no idea of the divine chaos waiting to unfold. Hermes says, chuckling softly, Troy was peaceful then, unprepared for the future, completely unaware that their son, technically adopted son, was about to change everything. You glance at him. Adopted? Oh yes. Hermes nods. You see, Paris didn't grow up as a prince. He was abandoned as a baby. Prophecy issues. Long story. Mortals love prophecies almost as much as gods hate them. The pool ripples gently beneath the bridge, reflecting soft swirls of light. But for now, Hermes says, gently, Paris was just a shepherd with a dream. He gathered what little he had, slung a bag over his shoulder, and set off toward the horizon. The breeze shifts, carrying the faint scent of faraway citrus and warm sand, like the world preparing a path for a traveler. And you, Hermes adds, his voice softer, are following him step by step. He walks ahead, the light trailing after him like a sleepy glow. Come, he murmurs. Sparta awaits. The corridor beyond the courtyard narrows and bends, the marble warming under your feet, as though you're descending into a gentler, earthier part of Olympus. The walls are etched with faint, shimmering patterns, waves, ships, distant coastlines, glimpses of the mortal world laid out in soft relief. Hermes slows his pace, letting his sandals brush lightly along the floor, their tiny wings fluttering in a steady, soothing rhythm. Paris's journey to Sparta, he begins, was long, quiet, and filled with that particular kind of hope that makes a person walk farther than they've ever walked before. He swings his staff lightly, the sound tapping against your mind like a lullaby. He followed goat paths, traded stories with travelers, slept beneath starry skies, and all the while, Aphrodite nudged tiny blessings his way. Good weather, gentle dreams, friendly strangers. The air around you warms as you step into another terrace, this one open to the sky. Light spills across it, like melted honey, pooling over benches, pillars, and flowering vines. A fountain sits at the center, water curling lazily from one bowl into another, the sound soothing as a deep breath. Hermes pauses by the fountain, trailing his fingers through the stream before flicking droplets into the sunlight, where they catch and flare like tiny stars. Sparta, he says, was proud, disciplined, orderly, but it was also a place of hospitality. And when Paris arrived, dusty and travel-worn, he was welcomed without question. King Menelaus himself offered shelter. Mortals used to be very generous before they discovered politics. You follow Paris was given a room hood. Hermes continues. Simple but comfortable. Soft beds, woven blankets, a small window looking out toward the hills. And every night, he dreamed of the same face, gentle, radiant, framed in sunlight. He glances at you. The dreams were Aphrodite's doing, of course. She wanted him ready. You step into a shaded walkway draped in vines. The air cools noticeably, and the shadows sway like soft curtains. Hermes walks ahead, the wind catching in his cloak, making it flutter like a sleepy bird's wings. Now, he says, Helen of Sparta had a presence that softened even the sternest warrior's posture. Mortals spoke of her beauty with awe. Yes, but also of her kindness. She moved through the palace like a soft breeze, light, warm, calming. He pauses beside a stone relief, depicting a woman spinning cloth, her hair braided elegantly. The carving glows faintly, as if warmed by memory. When Paris saw her, Hermes says softly, time didn't stop, but it certainly stumbled. He felt as though he'd walked straight into the vision Aphrodite showed him, only fuller, realer, touched with breath and heartbeat. The path opens onto a small balcony, overlooking a garden of figs and cypress trees. Their dark leaves sway gently, brushing the air with earthy sweetness. You lean against the railing, feeling the stone smooth beneath your fingertips. Helen noticed Paris too, Hermes says, not with divine destiny, but with curiosity. He was different, not a soldier, not a courtier, not trying to impress. He carried a quietness she found refreshing. Hermes shrugs. Mortals forget this. But Helen was not a prize. She was a woman with her own thoughts, her own desires, and loneliness sits even in palaces. A bird glides overhead, its wings slicing the air in a soft, serene arc. They spoke, Hermes continues, gently at first, about, you imagine it, two young strangers finding warmth in each other's quiet words. And as they spoke, Hermes says, Aphrodite let her influence drift around them like invisible perfume. Not to force love, no, just to soften the hesitations mortals carry, to open the door. You step closer to Hermes as he looks out over the garden. One night, he says, voice lowering, Menelaus left Sparta for a funeral, and Paris and Helen were left alone in a palace filled with moonlight, dreams, and a goddess's very concentrated encouragement. The vines rustle softly around you, the night air of the memory drifting through Olympus like a warm echo. And it was then, Hermes says, that destiny turned its final corner. He steps away from the balcony, guiding you toward another archway. The golden light beneath the next archway settles around you like warm dust, drifting slow and lazy in the air. Hermes walks ahead with a quieter step than before, as though even he feels the gravity of the moment approaching, not heavy but softened by the sleepy inevitability of myth. The path curves gently downward, lined with lamps glowing like captured candlelight, each flame swaying in a rhythm that seems timed to your breath. Now, Hermes says, glancing over his shoulder, mortals like to dramatize this part. They talk about seduction and stolen queens and scandalous desires. He rolls his eyes, but the truth is far more human, and far more tangled. You step beside him, your footsteps muffled by a carpet of soft moss. The hallway walls shimmer faintly, replaying shadows of memories, small gestures, exchanged glances, half-finished sentences floating between two souls. Paris and Helen were not struck by lightning, Hermes continues. They didn't fall into love like stones into a river. It was slower, gentle, like sinking into a warm bath without realizing how far under you've slid until you open your eyes. He pauses, humming thoughtfully. Aphrodite merely ensured that the water felt pleasant. You pass a wide opening where a stream trickles through Olympus, the water gliding over polished stones with a soothing, continuous murmur. Hermes walks along its edge, trailing his fingertips across the surface, leaving ripples behind him. That night, he says softly, Sparta was quiet. The moon leaned low, generously spilling silver across the palace floors. Helen wandered the halls, unable to sleep. Paris did the same. The water's whisper deepens, adopting the cadence of the story. They found each other, not by divine orchestration, but because they both gravitated toward the same balcony, the one overlooking the sea. A warm breeze drifted through the columns. The air smelled like salt and ripe figs. They stood there, side by side, wrapped in moonlight, but saying nothing. He looks at you, knowingly. Sometimes silence is the most dangerous conversation. You continue along the stream until the path widens into a small amphitheater, carved from pale marble, light pools here in sleepy gold, reflecting off the curved steps, as though waiting for a whisper. Paris spoke first. Hermes says, settling onto one of the steps, he told her about his dreams, about the feeling of being pulled by something he didn't understand, and Helen, his voice grows softer. She admitted she felt something, too. Not certainty, not clarity, just a warmth she hadn't known in a long time. You sit beside him, the marble radiating a comforting heat. They talked until the moon dipped low, until the palace grew still, until even the torches burned with smaller flames, and eventually, Hermes lifts a hand, drawing a circle in the air. They realized the world would not wait for them to think this through. A soft breeze drifts through the amphitheater, stirring the air like a sigh. Helen knew what choosing Paris meant. Hermes continues. She was not naive. She knew her name could topple kingdoms, and Paris, well, he knew he was no match for the king she was married to. But for a moment, they looked at each other, and found courage in the soft glow between them. You rest your hand on the step, feeling the faint vibration of distant thunder. Hermes tilts his head. Menelaus would return soon, and Helen feared that if she waited, she might bury these feelings beneath duty, until nothing remained. He lifts a brow. Mortals do that sometimes. Gods too, though they pretend otherwise. He stands, brushing imaginary dust from his cloak. Helen chose quietly, gently, and together they prepared to leave. The amphitheater's lighting seems to dim, as if reflecting the hush of their decision. A ship was waiting on the shore, Hermes says. One Paris had arrived in, small but sturdy, no bright colours, nothing regal, just a vessel meant for a shepherd, not a prince. You rise with him, feeling the story tug you forward, like a soft current. The night wrapped itself around them, as they slipped into the dark halls, past sleeping guards, past rooms filled with polished shields. They carried nothing but their clothes, their breath, and a fragile string of hope. You pace beside Hermes, as the corridor extends toward a brilliant glow, and when they boarded the ship, he whispers. The sea greeted them with gentle waves. The winds hummed a warm lullaby. Aphrodite, of course, claimed she orchestrated those soft winds. I maintain the weather simply felt romantic that night. You smile softly. They sailed, he says, not toward Troy, not yet, but toward the open sea, guided by a promise too sweet to doubt. The golden glow brightens, beckoning. Hermes steps through it. Come, he murmurs. Their journey is only beginning. The light softens into a pearly dawn as you follow Hermes onto a wide terrace overlooking shifting clouds. The air carries a faint scent of salt and blooming myrtle, as though Olympus remembers the sea Paris's ship crossed that night. Hermes rests his elbows on the marble railing, looking out as if he can still see the tiny vessel drifting across the Aegean. The journey back wasn't quick, he begins. Paris and Helen spent days on the water, moving with the current rather than fighting it. The sea remained gentle, the winds steady, almost suspiciously so. He smirks. Aphrodite swears. She merely encouraged the weather. I'm sure you can hear my skepticism. You smile, leaning beside him. The clouds below swirl like pale blue silk, their patterns shifting in slow, sleepy spirals. On the ship, Hermes says. They found a rhythm. Paris, with his shepherd's steadiness, steered the boat. Helen sat near the bow, letting her finger Hermes helsna mauin. So, the hels boat orden, a burden of fingers skimmed the sea spray when the waves rose. Sometimes they talked. Paris told her about his childhood on Mount Ida, Hermes continues. How he grew up among sheepdogs and wildflowers, how he dreamed more of peace than glory. Hermes taps the railing thoughtfully. Helen listened. She liked that he wasn't trying to impress her. Mortals often forget how refreshing honesty can be. He pushes away from the railing and starts walking down a slope toward a garden blooming with white laurel flowers. Their fragrance drifts around you, warm and soft, like a whisper. Helen told him about her youth, he says, hands clasped behind his back, about being admired by every kingdom but rarely understood, about feeling like a symbol more than a person. The flowers sway gently as you pass, releasing tiny bursts of fragrance that seem to settle into your shoulders, softening every muscle. They found comfort in small things, Hermes says, sharing dried figs, watching dolphins leap beside the boat, listening to the gentle slap of waves against the hull. It wasn't grand passion. It wasn't mythic fire. He pauses, smiling softly. It was quiet, warm, human. You step into another shaded walkway, lined with lanterns glowing a muted gold. But of course, Hermes says, lowering his voice, the gods were watching. A gust of faint wind curls past him, as though a divine eye is rolling somewhere above. Hera was furious, he says. Athena, equally so. Not because Paris loved Helen, but because Aphrodite won. Again, the pettiness truly is the spine of this entire myth. He gestures toward a mural etched along the wall, 3 goddesses, an apple, a shepherd looking very overwhelmed. Hera wanted justice, Athena wanted fairness, Aphrodite wanted to be right, Zeus wanted to avoid being yelled at by all 3 simultaneously. Hermes lifts a finger. So, he pretended not to notice anything happening. You chuckle under your breath. Back on the mortal sea, Hermes continues. Paris and Helen approached Troy. The city's walls gleamed even from a distance, tall and bright as polished ivory. Paris felt hope. Helen felt nerves. Neither understood the storm quietly gathering behind them. The path opens into a quiet portico, where statues stand half-shaded, their faces softened by warm shadows. When they arrived, Hermes says, the Trojans welcomed them. Priam embraced Paris, grateful his long-lost son had returned, unaware of the trouble trailing behind like a shadow, with excellent stamina. He sits on a stone step, patting the spot beside him. You join him, feeling the stone's warmth seep through your clothes. Helen found kindness there, Hermes says, gentle smiles. Warm welcomes, a palace that felt less like a cage and more like a place where breath moved freely. He folds his hands. For a brief moment, just a sliver of time, everyone was happy. You follow Hermes through the dimmer archway, where the light shifts into a soft, melancholy gold, as though Olympus itself exhales a quiet sigh before the story dips into deeper waters. The air cools, scented faintly with myrrh and warm cedar, and the marble beneath your feet takes on a muted grey tone, streaked with silver veins. Hermes walks slowly now, sandals whispering against the floor, as if pacing himself for the part of the tale that never arrives gently. Back in Sparta, he begins. Menelaus returned from the funeral in perfectly ordinary spirits, which, for a king, means he was moderately irritated, but not volcanic. Hermes lifts a brow. Unfortunately, that mood didn't last. You pass a row of tall Ionic columns, carved with scenes of ships, long oars slicing through stylized waves. The carvings seem to sway in your peripheral vision, as though responding to the narrative itself. Menelaus went looking for Helen. Hermes continues, fully expecting to find her in the courtyard, or with the handmaidens, or perhaps embroidering something vaguely functional. Instead, he found absence, quiet, rooms too tidy, a bed too perfectly made. Hermes places a hand over his heart, and Menelaus, not being known for subtlety, reacted exactly how you're imagining, shouting, storming, demanding answers from startled servants, who had absolutely none to give. He steps into a high, echoing hall, lit by floating orbs of pale fire. Their gentle light casts long shadows across the floor, like stretched satin ribbons. You walk beside him, hearing your footsteps merge with the soft hum of those drifting flames. It didn't take long for him to realize, Hermes says, voice lowering, that Paris was also missing. You picture it. 2 empty rooms, 1 queen, 1 foreign guest, both gone at once. Even the most patient man might raise an eyebrow. Menelaus raised an entire army's worth. Hera, Hermes says pointedly, was delighted by this development, not because she enjoyed Menelaus's distress, though she wasn't unmoved by it, but because it meant Paris was about to receive his divine comeuppance. Hermes taps his temple lightly, and Hera is always keeping score. You follow him through the hall as the floating orbs drift overhead like sleepy stars. Their glow pulses gently, calming your breath into an even rhythm. Menelaus sent word to his brother, Agamemnon, Hermes explains. And Agamemnon, who loved war the way some people love olives, saw this as the perfect excuse to gather the Greek kings. Hermes sighs, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Never give a bored king a noble-sounding reason to start a conflict. They'll write 10 poems about duty before you can finish asking, wait, is this necessary? He steps through another archway, and suddenly you're in a garden of cypress trees, tall and still, as silent sentinels. A warm wind drifts between them, carrying the scent of resin and distant ocean foam. The Greek kings assembled, Hermes says. They remembered their old oath, the one that bound them to protect Helen's marriage. A surprisingly cooperative idea at the time, not so convenient now. You walk a narrow path between the trees, each one rising dark and graceful against the glowing sky. Some came out of loyalty, Hermes continues. Some for honor, some because they suspected refusing would look bad on their resumes. And some, he grimaces, because the gods insisted. He flicks a hand, dismissively, wings on his sandals fluttering. Anyway, Menelaus demanded they retrieve Helen. Agamemnon demanded they retrieve glory. Odysseus demanded to stay home, but he was overruled. Hermes leads you toward a quiet pool, reflecting the cypress silhouettes, like an ink painting. The water barely moves, and so, Hermes says, sitting on the edge of the pool, ships were made ready. You'll step into a new expanse of Olympus, where the sky darkens to a muted navy, as though draped in twilight while still holding its warmth. Hermes walks ahead toward a balcony lined with stone balustrades carved in the shape of sea serpents, each one softened by centuries of divine breeze. The wind here carries the crisp scent of open ocean, salt, mist, and something ancient beneath it all. When the Greek fleet finally gathered, Hermes says, resting his palms on the railing, it was a sight mortals still try to recreate in paintings, usually with more drama and far less accuracy. Below the balcony, clouds shift into the shape of waves, gentle and rhythmic, as though Olympus imitates the sea to help you imagine it. Row after row of ships, Hermes continues, their hulls dark and sleek, warriors from every corner of Greece standing on deck, bronze armor catching the sun in slow burning glints. The sound, oh, the sound. He closes his eyes briefly, oars dipping into water, ropes stretching, voices echoing across the shore like a restless tide. You can almost hear it, muffled, distant, softened by time. But not everything ran smoothly, Hermes says, opening his eyes, again with a faint smirk. The fleet faced a problem before they even left the harbor. He gestures toward the cloud waves, which suddenly still. There was no wind. You blink. Hermes spreads his hands as if to say, yes, exactly. 1,000 ships, he says, ready for battle, and not a single breeze to nudge them forward. You'd think the gods might see the irony. He resumes walking, guiding you along the balcony. The sky warms to a smoky lavender, the color of early dawn wrapped in soft fog. Why the stillness? Hermes asks rhetorically. Ah, that was Artemis. She was displeased with Agamemnon. Something about a sacred deer, poor decision-making, long story, best told when you're more awake. He waves the tangent away like a drifting feather. The point is, he says, Agamemnon found himself in an awkward position. The war he'd been so eager to lead could not begin without divine permission. Artemis demanded repayment, a sacrifice. You pause, the air around you thickening with quiet tension. Hermes lifts a calming hand. No fear, he says gently. We are not telling the bloody version. This is a sleep story. Remember, we choose the soft-edged variant. A warm breeze passes, easing the stiffness that had gathered in your shoulders. Some accounts say Agamemnon did as Artemis demanded. Others say Artemis intervened at the last moment, replacing the sacrifice with a deer and whisking the girl away to safety. Hermes shrugs lightly. I prefer the second version. More hopeful, fewer nightmares, he continues. Either way, once the goddess was appeased, the wind returned. Soft at first, like the exhale of a giant waking from a nap, then steady enough to carry sails. The cloud waves below begin drifting again, their motions slow and hypnotic. And so, Hermes says, the ships launched. 1,000 hulls sliding across the water, oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm, sunlight shimmering across bronze helmets. He taps the railing. Mortals saw this and thought, ah, yes, destiny. Meanwhile, the gods up here were mostly thinking, I hope this doesn't take too long. He snorts softly. You should have heard Zeus. 10 years? Why 10? Why not 3? Or 5? Or better yet, none? Hera ignored him entirely. Of course. Hermes steps back from the railing, turning to face you. The Greeks sailed toward Troy with certainty, with conviction, with an unshakable belief that they understood the story they were part of. He leans in slightly, lowering his voice to a soft, almost conspiratorial whisper. But the truth is, they were stepping straight into a tale, crafted by divine egos, petty rivalries, and unresolved grievances. Hermes leads you away from the balcony, and into a quieter part of Olympus, where the hall narrows into a gentle curve draped in soft twilight. The air thickens with the scent of warm stone and faintly sweet laurel, as though the mountain itself understands that the tale is drifting into heavier waters, but still tries to keep everything wrapped in comfort. Lamps glow along the walls in a hazy amber, their flames flickering like sleepy eyes, trying to stay awake. Troy, Hermes says softly, walking with a slow, steady rhythm, wasn't built to be a battleground. It was built to be admired. He gestures toward the far wall, where the marble shifts into a mural, showing bright towers, wide gates, and the shimmer of sunlight bouncing off high fortifications. King Priam ruled with an unusual combination of compassion and stubbornness. The city thrived, markets bustled, children laughed in the courtyards, and the people believed the gods favored them. He pauses, head tilting slightly, which, to be fair, they mostly did, until they didn't. You walk beside him as the mural scenery changes with each step. Golden fields swaying in the wind, merchants carrying baskets of figs, the faint smile of a queen passing through blooming gardens. When Paris brought Helen home, Hermes continues, there was confusion certainly, but also celebration. Priam welcomed her warmly, treating her as an honored guest, rather than stolen royalty. The Trojans, curious but generous, embraced the story Paris gave them, that the gods themselves guided Helen to him. Hermes glances at you, and honestly, in a very roundabout way, that wasn't wrong. The hallway opens into a circular chamber, filled with a soft floating mist. Pale gold lines swirl lazily across the floor, forming shapes that dissolve as quickly as they appear. Hermes steps inside, letting the mist curl around his ankles, like a friendly cat. Life in Troy went on, he says. Helen wandered the gardens, learning the names of the local herbs. She traced the patterns carved into the palace walls. She helped the women weave bright tapestries that fluttered in the wind. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. He smiles, faintly. Paris, meanwhile, basked in what he believed was Aphrodite's blessing. He became confident, sometimes a little too confident. He began training with Troy's finest warriors. He polished his hair more than necessary. He told dramatic stories about judging the goddesses, each retelling slightly more flattering than the last. Hermes lifts a brow. That boy loved a good self-narrative. You drift deeper into the chamber, feeling the mist cool your skin. The room is so quiet that even your breath feels like a soft welcome guest in the air. For a brief, shimmering moment, Hermes says, his voice growing gentler, Troy felt like a golden dream. Days passed without worry. Nights hummed with music and warm lamplight. Helen found laughter she'd forgotten she had. Paris found purpose he never expected. He exhales through his nose. Aphrodite, of course, was thrilled. She claimed the entire city glowed more beautifully because of love. Hera disagreed. Athena disagreed even louder. The mist pulses once with a muted glow, and while Troy flourished, Hermes gestures lightly. The Greek ships drew closer. You feel the shift, small, subtle, like a quiet tremor beneath your feet. No one in Troy could hear the distant oars. Hermes murmurs. No one saw the horizon slowly fill with sails. No one felt the weight of prophecy creeping closer, step by step. He tilts his head back, as though listening to something far above, but the gods did. The mist gathers near the ceiling, twisting into faint shapes, helmets, shields, spears, before dissolving away again, like smoke losing interest. The glow ahead unfolds into a wide, airy colonnade, where the ceiling seems to drift upward into clouds, shaped like drifting parchment. Hermes walks slowly here, as though pacing through a memory he carries, with equal parts fondness and regret. You follow him beneath tall marble pillars, warmed by sunlight, so gentle it feels like it's humming. When news finally reached Troy, Hermes begins. It arrived not with thunder or fire, but with a trembling fisherman rowing frantically toward the harbour. He taps the railing, overlooking the cloud sea. He had seen them, the Greek fleet, thousands of sails, a horizon swallowed by war. The warm light dims. A cool wind sweeps through the hall, like a long exhale. Messengers ran, bells rang. Priam stood on the walls, his heart sinking into his sandals. Hermes lifts a hand, lowering his voice. He loved his sons, all of them. Even Paris, the wayward, prophecy-haunted, apple-judging trouble magnate. A soft smile curves his lips, and he feared for him. You walk with Hermes, as the hall curves gently, almost like a shoreline folding around a bay. Hector, Hermes says, stood beside Priam, strong, calm, dependable, the kind of man who carries kingdoms on his shoulders, without ever complaining about the weight. He sighs wistfully. He was not pleased by this development. You imagine it, Hector's brow furrowing, arms crossed, the hint of exasperation only older siblings can truly master. The Trojans gathered in council. Hermes continues. Some argued Paris should send Helen back. Others insisted keeping her was a matter of honor. Paris, well, Hermes clears his throat delicately. He tried to give a speech, but Hector had to finish it for him. You bite back a smile. Meanwhile, in Helen's chambers, Hermes says gently. She stood at her window, watching Troy's people rush about in a whirlwind of fear and preparation. She felt guilt, deep, complicated guilt, woven with threads of longing, affection, and something that felt dangerously close to destiny. He pauses as the colonnade opens into a tranquil garden. Laurel trees form a soft canopy overhead, their branches swaying in a breeze, scented with resin and warmth. She didn't regret Paris, Hermes explains. Not in her heart's quiet places, but she regretted the waves her presence created. She knew what kings did when they felt wronged. She knew how easily egos became armies. The leaves shimmer faintly as sunlight filters through them, like molten gold. The Trojans prepared, Hermes says. Shields polished, spears sharpened, gates reinforced. The city hummed with a nervous energy, trembling beneath the surface, like a plucked string. You walk along a path lined with pale stones, softened by drifting petals. And then, Hermes says, the Greeks appeared off the shore. His tone grows softer, almost reverent. Thousands of ships, sails billowing like white wings, bronze gleaming, drums beating slow, heavy rhythms across the water. He closes his eyes, inhaling slowly. Troy stood on its walls and watched the horizon turn into a living storm. A long silence stretches between you, and among the ships, Hermes adds, were names that would echo through ages. Achilles, Odysseus, Ajax, Menelaus himself. He opens his eyes, but before the first spear flew, before the first shout broke the air, before the decade of war began, something unexpected happened. He steps closer to you, lowering his voice to a sleepy murmur. The Greeks sent envoys, peaceful envoys, to negotiate. The breeze pauses, then shifts direction as if even the air wants to lean closer. A simple request, Hermes says. Return Helen and the Greeks would go home. He glances toward the next archway where light flickers like torchfire reflected on water. And Troy, he whispers, had to decide. He steps forward, the faint sound of distant waves curling around his words. Come, he says. The council debates begin. Hermes guides you into a quieter stretch of Olympus, one shaped like an echo of the Trojan council chamber below, a long, rounded hall with gently curving walls, and a ceiling that glows like warm parchment. The air is thick with an almost ceremonial hush, though softened by the ever-present comfort of divine spaces. Even the lamps here flicker more slowly, their flames swaying as though tired of watching mortals struggle through the same arguments, century after century. Troy's council, Hermes begins, stepping lightly across the marble floor, was filled with some of the wisest men of the age, and Paris, he nods solemnly. We mustn't forget Paris. You walk beside him as faint golden outlines shimmer across the walls, depicting ghost-like silhouettes of advisors, princes and elders deep in discussion. Their gestures appear slow and graceful, like strokes of a painter's brush drifting through warm air. When the Greek envoys arrived, Hermes continues, they were surprisingly civil, no threats, no roaring speeches, just a simple message, return Helen, and we will leave. Hermes raises a finger. Menelaus himself was among them. He tried to keep his temper in check. But mortals rarely hide insult well. You pause at a carved bench, shaped like curling sea foam. Hermes sits and pats the seat beside him. You settle gently, feeling the marble warmed by sunlight that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Priam listened patiently. Hermes says, he was a king who understood the difference between pride and doom. He wanted peace. He wanted time. He wanted the gods to stop using his family for dramatic subplot. A soft breeze curls around you as though agreeing, but Paris, Hermes sighs, stood tall, or at least tallish, and insisted Helen was with him willingly. He said returning her would be a betrayal of the gods. Hermes narrows one eye, which is one interpretation. The wall shifts to show a faint glowing Helen, her expression soft and troubled. Helen told them the truth. Hermes says quietly that she did not hate Paris, that she felt pulled toward him by forces she couldn't explain, that she was conflicted. He tilts his head. Mortals often forget that Helen was honest, even when her honesty pleased no one. You watch as the silhouettes shift, figures raising their hands, some in support, some in objection. Hector, Hermes says, with a tone tinged in deep fondness, stood up next. He loved Paris, deeply, fiercely, annoyingly, but he also understood war better than anyone in that room. He warned them that the Greeks were not bluffing, that their armies were vast, that Troy might not survive the cost of this choice. Hermes falls quiet for a beat, letting the soft murmurs of the hall fill the silence like a distant lullaby. Some elders supported returning Helen, he continues. Others said keeping her was a matter of pride. Some simply didn't trust the Greeks. He shrugs gently. Mortals are complicated. That's why you're entertaining. He stands again, hands sliding behind his back as he resumes walking. Priam listened to all of them, Hermes says. Then, with his heart heavier than his crown, he made his choice. You follow him into a small alcove, where golden mist curls upward like incense. He refused, Hermes murmurs. He refused to surrender Helen. He refused to cave to Greek pressure. He believed it was the gods who guided her to Troy, and that sending her back would bring divine punishment. Hermes glances at you. You see the irony. You do. It sits in the air like a quiet, knowing smile. And so, Hermes says, voice quieting into something soft and slow, the Greek envoys returned to their ships. Menelaus seethed. Odysseus whispered strategies. The drums began to beat. You hear it, just a faint echo beneath the marble floor, a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a heart bracing for impact. On Troy's walls, Hermes continues. The people gathered. Mothers clutched children. Warriors tightened armor straps. Young boys pretended to be brave. He pauses near a tall marble column, carved with gentle spirals. And Helen, he says softly, stood on her balcony, gazing at the sea where thousands of ships began to shift and turn, forming lines like wings of a vast, bronze bird. A warm breeze brushes your face, as though the memory still carries heat. She whispered a single apology into the wind. Hermes says, and the wind, because it is better at compassion than most gods, carried it far. He looks toward the next archway. Its light tinted with muted bronze. Come, Hermes murmurs. The first battle waits. The archway opens into a broad hall that feels heavier, though still cloaked in the gentle softness Olympus insists on providing. Torches line the walls, their flames flickering lazily in hues of amber and copper. A faint rumble echoes through the cavernous space, not loud, not sharp, but like distant waves crashing in slow motion. Hermes walks beside you, his expression thoughtful. The Greeks did not attack immediately, he says. They're dramatic, but not chaotic. They took their time unloading supplies, checking weapons, arranging formations. All the while, Troy's walls watched silently, tall and glowing in the sun. You step onto a platform overlooking swirling clouds, shaped like miniature armies. Shields gleam faintly. Spears rise and fall, as though following invisible breaths. When the first battle finally came, Hermes says, it happened on a bright morning, too peaceful for war. Birds sang, the sea sparkled, the air drifted warm and slow, perfect weather for a nap, not a conflict. He leans his elbows on the railing, gazing down at the cloud armies with a softness that suggests even gods find this moment bittersweet. A young Trojan warrior, Hermes continues, one of the eager ones, ran out onto the field to challenge the Greeks. His heart burned with honor. His hands shook with nervous energy. He shouted something brave sounding. Hermes shrugs lightly. The Greeks responded, loudly, with many more warriors than necessary. The clouds below shift into two masses pressing toward each other, their movements slow and dreamlike. The first clash, Hermes says, voice sinking into a gentle murmur, was more noise than damage. Shields slammed, spears scraped. Warriors tested each other, not yet committed to real bloodshed. He sighs. It was less battle and more posturing. You nod as you walk with him into another chamber, where soft specks of light drift lazily through the air like dust caught in a sunbeam. Hector held back at first, Hermes explains. He watched from a distance, arms crossed, jaw set, trying to gauge the Greek's strength. Paris, meanwhile, Hermes rubs the bridge of his nose. Paris wanted to prove himself. Very badly. He strutted. He posed. He adjusted his helmet, at least 4 times. He tried to engage the Greek champions. Hermes lifts his eyes slowly. They ignored him. You bite back a sleepy smile. One Greek warrior finally accepted. Hermes says, Menelaus. He lets the name hang. Yes, Helen's husband. The lights overhead dim, as though in sympathy. Paris panicked. Hermes says gently. He tried to stand his ground. Truly. But Menelaus was bigger, older, angrier, and far more motivated. A soft wind drifts past, carrying a note of warm myrtle. Paris fled, Hermes says simply, right back toward Troy's walls. He holds up a finger. Important detail. He tripped. A little. Not dramatically. Just enough for everyone to notice. You can almost hear the collective sigh of the Trojan archers. Hector, Hermes continues, found him afterward, and gave him a very long talk. He clears his throat. Brother, Hector said, using a tone only older siblings can wield. If you insist on starting divine arguments, you must learn not to flee from their consequences. Hermes smiles gently. Hector didn't hate Paris, he says. He loved him. Enough to be frustrated by him. Enough to want him safe. Enough to wish he'd been born far away from prophecies and apples. You move deeper into the hall, where the walls shimmer with soft bronze reflections. Flickers of battle, flashes of armor, sparks of movement captured in slow, dreamy motion. The first battle ended with no victory. Hermes murmurs. Both sides withdrew. Both sides planned. Both sides prayed. He stops beside a quiet pool of still water, its surface reflecting warm clouds drifting above. And the gods, he says, voice barely a whisper, argued. Hermes guides you through the crimson-lit archway, and the glow shifts into something softer, more like the reflection of sunset on warm stone than the harsh red of battle. The corridor opens into a broad terrace lined with statues of the gods, each figure carved in smooth white marble and illuminated by a gentle amber haze. Despite the grandeur, everything here feels muted, slowed, like Olympus itself knows this is the moment where things start to deepen and stretch. The gods, Hermes begins, with a sigh that seems to echo faintly through the terrace, are many things: wise, powerful, immortal, but above all, they are incredibly dramatic. He leads you between statues of Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each one posed with the kind of gentle tension that makes you suspect the sculptor had strong opinions about divine personalities. When the war began, Hermes continues, every god immediately started picking sides, some out of loyalty, some out of spite, some because they heard their friends were signing up and didn't want to miss anything. He stops by the statue of Athena, her spear raised elegantly. Athena chose the Greeks, Hermes says softly. She admired their discipline, their strategies, their potential for clever mischief. He leans closer, lowering his voice. Also, she was still annoyed about the judgment of Paris. You continue walking beside him as, Hermes says, gesturing toward a statue of the war god lounging dramatically. As always, also chose the Greeks, not for honor of course, but because he liked their brutal efficiency. He said they swung swords with excellent enthusiasm. Hermes lifts an eyebrow. You can imagine how Hera felt about sitting at the same side of the battlefield as Ares. You walk to the next statue, a tall, regal Hera with a serene expression that clearly masks a simmering storm. Hera supported the Greeks. Hermes says she believed Troy needed to be punished for enabling Paris. She also wanted to prove a point to Aphrodite that she has since repeated every century. Hermes clears his throat. The point being, this is what happens when you meddle. He steps toward the statue of Aphrodite, a flowing figure with flowers carved into her hair. Aphrodite, of course. Hermes says, supported the Trojans, specifically Paris. She insisted he was simply following her blessing, and therefore deserved her protection. He tilts his head. Some might call that biased. Others might call it favoritism. Aphrodite calls it devotion. You smile as he guides you onward. Poseidon chose the Greeks. Hermes continues, because he liked their ships. Truly, that's it. He once told me, I like the craftsmanship. Hermes shrugs. Simple tastes. You pass a statue of Apollo, carved as if caught mid-song. Apollo chose the Trojans. Hermes says he admired their artistry, their music, their culture, and also, importantly, he did not like how loudly the Greeks prayed to him during battle. Hermes waves a hand, dismissively. Too needy, too dramatic. The terrace widens, marble pillars, framing a view of the cloud sea below. The sky has darkened to a muted indigo, stars flickering softly like drowsy fireflies. And Zeus. Hermes smiles with a sigh. Zeus declared neutrality. He said interfering would only complicate things, which was hilarious, considering he was deeply invested emotionally, but refused to admit it. He taps his temple. I heard him mutter once, why can't they all just sit down and talk? Hermes stops at the edge of the terrace, resting his hands lightly on the railing. But despite their declarations, he says softly, the gods never truly stayed still. They drifted in and out of the battlefield, nudged arrows, blocked spears, whispered strategies, softened fears. Softened fears. He tilts his head thoughtfully. Did the get the cozy sorrows divartie, but far more persistent. The wind shifts, carrying the faint scent of olive wood smoke, and something like distant bronze. And down below, Hermes murmurs. The first true battles began. The clouds swirl into shapes. Warriors, horses, chariots, moving slowly, dreamily, like a painting half stirring. Trojan chariots thundered across the plains. Greek phalanxes braced. The earth shook in gentle ripples. And all the while, Paris watched from the safety of the walls, trying to decide if he should join or remain politely alive. Hermes huffs a soft laugh. Hector fought with grace, Aeneas with courage, Ajax with strength, Achilles with a very, very dramatic flourish. The cloud shapes brighten then dissolve. But this war, Hermes says quietly, was never truly about strategy or pride or even love. He turns to you, eyes soft with the weight of what he knows. It was a tapestry woven from divine grudges, mortal choices, and the soft, small decisions that ripple outward farther than anyone expects. The wind calms, the world settling into a slower breath. Come, Hermes whispers. It's time we walk closer to the battlefield. The next archway leads into a broad, dimly lit hall where the floor gleams like polished obsidian dusted with starlight. Tiny flecks of gold shimmer just beneath the surface, as though a constellation has been trapped inside the stone. Hermes walks forward with slow, careful steps, and you follow him as the distant echoes of battle emerge. Not sharp or jarring, but softened, muted, filtered through Olympus's insistence on calm. The battlefield, Hermes says, quietly, was not a single place. It was a landscape of shifting loyalties, changing tides and footprints, pressed into dust that once held wheat. He sweeps a hand outward. The clouds below reshape into faint, drifting images of plains stretching under the sun. Some days, Hermes explains, the Greeks pushed forward. Their warriors surged like great waves crashing against Troy's walls. Other days, the Trojans swept across the field like warm winds, swift and bright. He guides you around a circular pool at the center of the room. The surface of the water glows faintly, showing specks of bronze and silver that flicker like distant torches. It wasn't constant fighting, Hermes continues. Mortals tire. They argue. They wait for omens. They sharpen weapons slowly because it gives their hands something to do. Two armies can sit in the same fields for hours, simply watching each other. You pause beside him, gazing into the pool. And then, Hermes says gently, there were duels. Single combat meant to spare armies the bloodshed of full engagement. He taps the edge of the pool. It ripples, showing the faint outline of a warrior stepping forward. One of the first was Menelaus against Paris. Hermes sighs, the sound soft and sympathetic. Paris tried. He truly did. He showed up. He held a spear. He even looked determined for about 3 seconds. The water shimmers, revealing a faint shape of Paris slipping in the dust. Then he nearly lost immediately. Hermes rubs his forehead. It took Aphrodite intervening, whisking Paris away in a cloud of mist. To keep him alive, she deposited him gently in Helen's chambers, where he pretended to be wounded far more dramatically than necessary. You can almost picture it. Paris draped across soft cushions, sighing heavily, one hand on his forehead. Meanwhile, Hermes goes on. Hector apologized to Menelaus on Paris's behalf. Imagine that. Apologizing for your grown brother because he was dramatically rescued by a goddess in the middle of a duel. He shakes his head fondly. Hector was patient. Too patient. The pool shifts, glowing brighter, then dimming again like a heartbeat. As days turned into weeks, Hermes says, the war became a rhythm. Morning skirmishes, afternoon negotiations, evening feasts, nights filled with tired songs drifting across the plain from both camps.
You follow him deeper into the hall, the floor beneath you warming slightly with each step. There were truces, Hermes explains. Days when both sides buried their dead, shared stories, even traded goods. Mortals are strange, they can fight all morning and still enjoy a shared wine by sunset. He stops near a tall window that opens onto a view of drifting starlit clouds. And yet he says softly, every kindness, every gesture of peace, every fragile thread tying the two sides together, could be snapped instantly by the gods. A gentle rumble passes through the air. Sometimes Ares would stir up tempers, sometimes Athena would whisper strategies that tugged mortals back into conflict. Sometimes Hera or Aphrodite would nudge events just slightly out of balance. Hermes rests one hand on the window frame. War isn't only fought with swords, it's fought with pride, fear, jealousy, and the gods excel at those things. A faint glow drifts past the window, like a comet's sleepy tail. And yet, Hermes says, his voice softening, there were nights of quiet, nights when warriors lay beneath the stars, listening to the rustle of barley fields in the distance, wondering why they were here. He steps back from the window. Some wondered if Helen was worth it. Others wondered if Paris should be locked in a storage room until the war ended. Hermes' eyes sparkle with tired humour. And Helen, she watched from Troy's walls. She saw both sides. She grieved for them all. She knew her name was the spark, but not the flame. Hermes gestures toward the next archway, lit with a deeper, duskier gold. Come, he murmurs. The story now turns toward Destiny's favourite warrior. He steps forward, his sandals whispering across the starlit floor. It's time to visit Achilles.
The next archway glows with a deeper molten gold warmer than firelight, but gentler, as though aware of whose story you're about to enter. Hermes steps into the glow with a softened expression, half fond, half exhilarating, like someone preparing to speak about a very talented friend who is also extremely difficult. Achilles, Kiti shares, almost sighing the name out. A marvel, a menace, a walking contradiction, wrapped in bronze and ego. You follow him into a vast space, shaped like a hall of echoes. The air feels thicker here, hushed yet humming, as though distant heartbeats have left a rhythm lingering in the marble. The walls shimmer, with faint depictions of a young man running across beaches, wrestling rivers, learning from centaurs, each scene blurred into something soft and dreamlike. Born to Thetis, Hermes continues, a sea nymph who desperately wanted him to be immortal, and to Peleus, or mortal king, who desperately wanted a quiet life. He lifts a brow. Neither got what they wanted. You walk past a fountain whose water moves in slow motions, curling and uncurling like the tide. Who counter? Thetis tried everything, Hermes explains, dipping him in sacred waters, coating him in divine oils, hiding him on islands dressed as a girl. Don't ask, it was a phase. Wow. He waves the image away. Eventually, she accepted that her son was not fully immortal, but he was blessed, stronger than any man alive, swifter, more radiant, and very aware of these facts. Hermes pauses beside a softly glowing mural of Achilles as a boy, running barefoot across the sand, golden hair trailing behind him like sunlight unspooling. Achilles liked glory, Hermes murmurs. He liked honour, he liked proving himself, and he especially liked being right. A soft breeze stirs, carrying the faint scent of salt and warm bronze. So when Agamemnon gathered the Greek kings, Hermes continues, Thetis tried, truly tried, to keep Achilles away. She warned him of destiny, of danger, of the song his life would become. But heroes are drawn to their stories the way moths are drawn to lanterns, slowly, inevitably, even if they know the flame will burn. You walk toward a terrace where the clouds below shift into scenes of Greek warriors preparing their ships. Achilles joined the war, Hermes says, with Patroclus at his side. Patroclus,
Soft-spoken, warm-hearted, gentle as a summer river, the steady presence to Achilles' storm. His voice softens even more. They balanced each other, like morning sun and cool shade, like a blade and its sheath. The clouds reshape into two figures standing at the bow of a ship, wind playing with their hair in mirrored gestures. When Achilles arrived at Troy, Hermes continues, the Greeks whispered with relief, their greatest warrior, their unstoppable force. He lowers his voice. But unstoppable forces are only useful if they are willing. You follow him through a columned walkway glowing with faint amber light, and Achilles Hermes adds, had one flaw that made him unpredictable. He pauses, waiting for the air to still around you. Pride. The word echoes gently, softened into something almost tender. He demanded respect, Hermes says, from kings, from peers, from anyone with ears, really. He rolls his eyes fondly. He especially demanded respect from Agamemnon, who, well, struggled with the concept. You pass a tall, narrow pool reflecting small sparks of golden light. The early battles were breathtaking, Hermes says. Achilles moved like lightning wrapped in silk, quick, effortless, beautiful. Troy trembled whenever he stepped onto the field. Even their bravest warriors hesitated. Hermes gestures with one hand and the clouds below briefly flash into shapes, a shining figure driving forward, spears breaking around him like waves against stone. But here is the delicate irony, Hermes murmurs. Achilles was destined to be the Greeks' greatest weapon, yet the gods knew he would also be their greatest challenge. He tilts his head toward the next archway, where a deeper darkness coils like distant smoke. Because when pride is wounded, Hermes whispers even a hero steps away from the battlefield. He motions for you to follow him onward, and soon, very soon, Achilles' pride will be wounded. He walks into the dimming light, voice a low, warm murmur. Come, we're nearing the quarrel that almost ended the war before it began. The hall you enter now is quieter, narrower, lit by low golden lamps that hang like floating embers. Their light gathers in soft pools on the floor, leaving warm shadows that sway with each breath you take. Hermes walks more slowly here, as though tugged by memories that carry a heaviness wrapped in velvet. It started, Hermes says gently, with a victory. He gestures, and the clouds below swirl into images of Greek warriors returning to camp with spoils, armor, horses, woven cloth and captives. The glow from the cloud mirror shifts, reflecting their tired but triumphant faces. One captive in particular, Hermes continues, was named Chrysis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, a priest who begged for her return. You follow him through the dim hall, the lamps flickering softly like tired eyes. Agamemnon refused, Hermes says, voice lowering. He was king. He believed his pride was more valuable than peace. A faint rumble of thunder rolls somewhere far above. Apollo disagreed. The lamps flicker. The air cools slightly. He sent a plague, Hermes says, not loud or violent, just relentless. Day by day, warriors grew ill. Fires burned lower. Songs grew quiet. He walks past a tall window where the clouds shimmer dull and grey. The Greeks demanded Agamemnon return Chrysis. He did. Hermes sighs, but kings dislike admitting fault, and Agamemnon, craving compensation, seized Briseis instead. You pause. Hermes nods slowly. Yes, he murmurs. Briseis, Achilles' companion. His comfort, his light amid the dust of battle. The lamps dim around you, softening into a warm gloom. Achilles pleaded, reasoned, then shouted, then burned with outrage so bright it could have lit the entire camp. Hermes lifts a hand in reenactment. You dishonor me, Achilles said. You take what was given to me. You treat me like a servant, not a warrior. You can hear the hurt woven through the remembered words. Agamemnon responded with equal fury, Hermes says. You are nothing without me, he said. I am king. You obey. The air thickens with the quiet tension of old wounds. And so Hermes continues. Achilles walked away. He steps onto a small, raised platform at the centre of the hall. He withdrew his troops, his myrmidons, his unstoppable warriors. He refused to lift a spear, refused to stand alongside the Greeks, refused to save them. Hermes exhales, a soft wind drifting across your cheek. And when Achilles steps away, he murmurs, the battlefield changes. The clouds beneath you shift, showing Greek soldiers struggling, Trojans advancing, Hector shining like a guiding flame among his people. Achilles sat in his tent, Hermes says softly, hands clenched, heart burning, grief and pride tangled like stubborn vines. He gestures beside him, as though seeing someone only he can perceive. Patroclus sat with him, gentle, steady, the voice of reason in a storm. The lamps brighten ever so slightly. And Briseis, Hermes adds, grieved quietly in her new chamber, torn from the only gentle space she had known. The hall feels still held in a moment of suspended breath. Agamemnon believed Achilles would return out of obligation. Hermes shakes his head. He did not understand Achilles at all. He steps toward the next archway, dark blue, rimmed with soft gold. And as the Greeks faltered, Hermes whispers Troy began to rise. He looks back at you, expression soft but heavy with meaning. It's time to walk with Hector into the battles Achilles refused. And now, as the halls of Olympus fade softly behind you, the air around you loosens into something quieter, something warmer, something that feels like the very last light before sleep pulls gently at the edges of your thoughts. The marble pathways dissolve into a pale golden haze, the kind that settles on still water at dusk, and even Hermes' footsteps become slower, softened, as though wrapped in layers of calm. You breathe, and the world exhales with you. All the voices you've heard tonight, the bickering gods, the weary heroes, the grieving kings, fade to a distant hum, no sharper than the echo of waves on a faraway shore. Their stories drift into place like leaves settling on a quiet pond, creating ripples that widen, slow, and finally smooth into stillness. There is no rush now, no battle waiting, no divine quarrel unfolding just out of sight. Only the gentle settling of a tale that has travelled far enough for one night. Hermes gives you one last soft panel, sleepy around the edges, warm as candlelight left burning for comfort rather than brightness. His voice is low, steady, a lull in itself. Rest now, he says. Olympus will keep arguing tomorrow. It always does, but tonight you've walked far enough. The glow around you thins, softens, stretches into long bands of warm colour, rosy dusk melting into pale gold melting into muted silver, and silver dissolving into the deep, velvety blue of quiet night. Let your breath lengthen, let your shoulders loosen, let the last threads of the story unwind like a slowly unspooled ribbon. Nothing urgent remains, just the gentle dark, just the soft weight of blankets, just the slow drift of thought dissolving into rest. You've reached the quiet part now, and you can fall asleep whenever you're ready.